Welcome, anime enthusiasts! Today we dive into the harmonious world of anime soundtracks at the Reddit Anime Awards 2023. I'm excited to present one of the evening's most melodious categories, Best Original Soundtrack. This award honors the composers and musicians who enrich our favorite anime with enchanting melodies. From epic scores to catchy themes, these soundtracks enhance every scene, evoking emotions long after the credits roll. Without further ado, here are your nominees for Best OST of 2023.
And the winner for the jury award is Trigun Stampede, composed by Tatsuya Kato. And the public chose Oshino Ko, composed by Takuro Ika.
One of the things that I've always found really interesting about OSTs, especially that one year we were able to have Rose Bridges on, was that OSTs are more than just setting a mood and providing some sort of ambiance to a scene. They can be like pretty clever vessels for thematics, so inform some kind of narrative component. Did you see that running through any of these OSTs, and especially our winners?
Yeah, definitely noticed a lot of good use of leitmotifs to convey themes over the course of the story. I'll speak to Oshino Ko first. Ai's theme, which is introduced very early on, is a standout across all of the soundtracks that were up for nomination this year and has an incredible leitmotif that the first episode is able to play off in a variety of ways. Famously, that 1 hour long first episode that comes to climax in the song Mother and Children, which is use of piano always brings me to tears. And then Ai's theme continues, or Ai's leitmotif and melodic idea continues to propagate throughout the series with Kana, Ruby. It's really quite fantastic. Trigun Stampede similarly has a great theme in Knives' theme, which comes in and out and combats with Rem's leitmotif, especially in standout songs like Drain Arm. I mean, this was a great year for really interesting thematic ideas in soundtracks.
Can you explain to the audience what a leitmotif is?
I prepared a bit about this leitmotif thing because this year I'm actually a leitmotif hater.
Oh,
Wow.
And that's because of the way that just to give a bit of context for what I think good usage of soundtracks are, there's two main guidelines that I try to look for. One is organic interactions between audio and visual. And the second is that there's space for the viewer's own emotions and interpretations to come in. Now, the way that the leitmotif I see thrown around in soundtrack discourse, I think it's been put on a pedestal, even though it's kind of regressed from what it originally meant. Are you too familiar with kind of the origins of the leitmotif?
I believe it's Wagner, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And basically, if you look up the definition of what a leitmotif is, you get something like a short recurring musical phrase associated with an idea, place, character. Which is fine, but it misses the essence of a leitmotif, I feel. Which is that it's not a static thing. Over the course of the show, it's translated as leading motif for a reason. It's not just in episode 1, it's gonna start as this, and then every time like a character appears, we're gonna play their theme.
Do you think that Knives' motif in the Trigun Stampede soundtrack doesn't evolve over the course of his appearances?
No, I think it doesn't evolve, and it's sort of deliberate in the way how he doesn't change his mind until the end. So I think that was very good, deliberate use of the leitmotif in that sense.
Compared to like Vash, who's a little bit more free flowing, and
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no way that you can combine Knives and Vash's leitmotifs without it being disharmonic mess.
yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about Heavenly Delusion? I think Heavenly Delusion has this kind of interesting interplay where you have these two very different settings, right? So you have this kind of post-apocalyptic fight for your life, almost Borderlandsy but more green world, and then that's contrasted against this kind of very sterile white environment of the school. Does it reflect itself in the OSC at all? And was that a consideration?
I think the most interesting thing about Heavenly Delusions is sort of from the name, like Heavenly Delusions. It's the heaven that's portrayed in the sort of closed off world isn't actually heaven, and the soundtrack is it does a lot of the work in portraying like the subtle horror of that situation.
Totally. Yeah, I fully agree. I think that Heavenly Delusion soundtrack, I mean, it's Ushio, so you know it's going to be like
Hmm.
synth heavy and really varied. I just thought that, if you compare a bunch of different tracks, like Cooking is this upbeat, like melodic, front facing, like bass focused, simple track. Compared that to Mina, which is like Akira esque in its vibe with like these traditional drums and this like haunting choir. And then compare that to Blue Blues Sky, which is a piano solo for so long before it starts sweeping in. I just think Ushio really nailed, to what Doka said, this like horror that felt like the subtle horror as opposed to like Jujutsu Kaisen season 2 soundtrack, which the horror also had horror elements, but it was much more like in this is how we're building like tension in terms of action as opposed to like tension in terms of the audience needs to be afraid and nervous about what's coming.
Now, replay. We often use our guests as a sort of barometer, right? So we know that awards things like this can be kind of insular and kind of circular in its logic. So we like to have outsiders come in and just make sure we're not crazy, right? Make sure that there's not too much bias going on. How much do your personal opinions align with these rankings? Are you more jury or are you more public?
I definitely. So I think the public. I think Oshinoko's soundtrack is great, but I also had Trigun Stampede as my favorite. So I'm more aligned with the jury in terms of the top vote. And then I also agree with the jury in terms of Mushoku Tensei Season 2 being the worst soundtrack of the 10 listed that were nominated. I thought Mushoku Tensei Season Two's soundtrack is generic fantasy. And I'm assuming it got nominated in the first place and did so well in the public vote purely off of its tracks that come from the Season 1 soundtrack, as opposed to the Season 2 soundtrack itself, which is not remarkable in any way, shape, or form.
Do you have anything to add, Doka?
I do think it's a step up from Mushoku Tensei season 1, but
Hmm.
that's not saying much considering where that placed.
Where did that place?
I think last. I'm pretty
I
sure
mean,
that
so
placed last.
it didn't move at all.
It didn't move at all. Uh,
I will say I'm really glad that I was invited to do the OST category because every time I get to join the Art Anime Awards, I always get to listen to or learn something new about a show that I otherwise would have skipped. And in this case, that was the Arknight soundtrack. Yuki Hayashi absolutely is 100% in their bag with this one. I was blown away by how great of a soundtrack this was. Definitely has a lot of his My Hero Academia and Haikyuu proclivities, but I truly thought it was a fantastic soundtrack. And public, I know you didn't watch it because it ranked eighth. Please give it a try if you haven't.
oh, for Arknights, what I really enjoyed was sort of Frost Nova's in her battle. She has like a lullaby, and the way that works, like her, that's part of her powers, I guess. And the strength of that is conveyed through the way how she starts singing it diegetically, and then it like overtakes, it kind of covers up and becomes the non-diegetic backing track, which just shows how overwhelming that she was in battle.
It is a really great soundtrack. I really love how Yuki Hayashi is maybe the best composer at building intensity, and Determina, the track named Determina, is like peak this because it continues to speed up and up and up until you get to a point where it feels like every note is a like 1/32nd note almost. It's an incredible soundtrack. I did want to ask Joka. I was kind of surprised to see Vinland Saga season 2 come in fifth. I thought the soundtrack was really impressive. Do you feel like the jury voted on it, gave it a fifth place position because Vinland Saga season one's soundtrack came in so much into the season 2 usage, or is it more like cause of it is maybe the most standard soundtrack out of the 10 in terms of like or instrumentation. I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you guys were having about Vinland Saga season 2.
So just to clarify, you think it's placed too high?
No. I thought it was. I personally would have had it either second or third.
Second or third? Oh, I see. Well, to give a bit of an idea to how we did voting, it was like a half consensus, half voting thing. So we locked in Oshinoko, Mishuko Tensei second last, and then the top three. It was actually a really strong year because I would say from like eighth up, like all the tracks had their own merit. So because you locked the first three in, it was just basically fighting for fourth or fifth. And I mean, Villain Saga, I don't think the first season had much of a role to do with our discussion on it.
Mm.
There was some criticism that some of the tracks got a bit repetitive because there is a lot of farming in this season,
Sure.
and they did use similar tracks. One thing that stood out to me was how you can kind of split the tracks in the soundtrack in half. There's these free flowing tracks with upper woodwinds and strings that are very free flowing and like a ton of rubato, and as well as these militaristic pieces that are filled with like percussion, lower strings, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And one of like it's kind of a meme at this point, but when Thorfinn says like I have no enemies, the build up to that, we there's like a ton of these drums and lower strings, and so there's a sort of subversion that happens where we expect him to fight on, but then he takes a pacifist turn, and it's really great how that's reflected in the music and how that's built up over the season.
For sure.
I'm not sure if I answered the question.
No, I definitely. I also just want to shout out the track itself and also Fire, both incredible tracks. And then Somewhere Not Here is a beautiful vocal piece with an incredible choir that I think captures the themes of the second season so well through its vocal performances. I did want to ask as well. Mobile Suit Gundam, Witch of Mercury. Does it get the fourth place position because Witch of Mercury, the song, the titular song, is such a banger, or is it more of a full soundtrack award?
It's a bit of both. Personally, when I was watching it for nominations, so we do like get a taste of most of the shows through the nominations during that period. I was convinced I was gonna have Mobile Suit Gundam like first or second because the prologue is just so insane. I don't think I can do it justice here without like any clips or stuff, but the compositional. Are you familiar with how OST pipelines work?
No,
Please illuminate us and
yeah.
the audience.
It's a very constrained pipeline because the composer and the soundtrack begin about 9 to 12 months before the actual anime airs, and the results, and at least that's what it is most of the time. But for Mobile Suit Gundam, I'm like pretty sure it's film scored, and
It
there's
seems
like
that way for sure.
and it's like there's like videos on YouTube of like them hiring a live orchestra to do this stuff, and basically they just play the track from start to finish because the track was made for the scene, and that's incredibly rare in anime. And
That's
so
really interesting. So you're saying that otherwise it's more just like the director or whoever comes up to the composer and says, "We're making this kind of show. We'd like to have this kind of music," and then they kind of develop a pool. Whereas Witch from Mercury was more kind of tailored and bespoke.
yeah, well, the prelude is the
Yeah, at
prologue
least
is
at least some of the scenes.
Yeah.
it falls off pretty hard, I would say, as it goes into the second cour, which is why
Fair.
it's only fourth.
More than fair.
One last thing before we part. It's been a great time. I just want to ask, music is often one of those things. CGP Grey called it cheat codes for emotions, which I think is accurate. and it can add so much to any particular scene. What your guys' favorite usage of music in any particular scene or moment throughout these nominees?
Do we avoid spoilers?
Try to avoid like really big ones. Like what are you thinking of?
The one that got me was in Heavenly Delusions. The ending, well, it's not actually shown explicitly, but the idea that the two different, I mean, parallel narratives are connected is actually foreshadowed in the music. I think that might be too big of a spoiler, so I'm gonna shout out Jujutsu Kaisen. The first core is actually insane. It's probably the best first core from this year. There's a scene in episode 5 where before Geto has his, breakdown and decides to kill all the non-sorcerers, he's having a shower, and the sound of the rain, I mean, not the sound of the rain, let me start
The
that again.
water.
Yeah, the water droplets as it hits his body in the floor, it starts to transition slowly into the sound of clapping. And this is an idea that reoccurs through this episode, where we get a flashback of basically he's reflecting on the trauma of having to do something bad, I guess, to avoid spoilers, and being applauded for that. And that's kind of stuck with him ever since, and it shows up everywhere. For example, there's also the rain, but we hear the rain slash clapping before we see the actual rain. So throughout this entire episode, we're put into the very distraught mind of Geto as he kind of, becomes the antagonist of the show.
And Replay, did you have a moment that particularly stood out to you because of the OST?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned a bunch already, and since Doka mentioned a Jujutsu Kaisen moment, I also just want to say Hidden Inventory, the actual song with the free jazz and the heavy percussion. Man, what a fucking banger!
Oh,
Yeah.
But I'll go with. I don't want to say Oshinoko again. I mean, the thing that gets me the most is Mother and Children's use of piano. Can't say why for spoiler reasons. So I'll go with there's a usage case later on where actually it's using a bunch of different tracks from the soundtrack when Akane's depression is at its apex and she is going for a walk in the middle of a typhoon. They keep cutting, just hard cutting from like nice lifting piano music of Akane becoming an actress, and then they hard cut to just a phone screen of terrible hate comments. And then go into the next track, and it's the same thing over and over again to the point where, and then the climax of the scene happens, and it truly gets you in her headspace. And I think it's a fantastic usage of soundtrack.
definitely both examples that kind of illustrate this kind of cheat code for emotions idea. And with that, it's the end of our segment. I want to thank you both for talking with me.
Thank you, Wilson.
Thanks for having us on.